Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Cessna Citation Longitude. Before we get started, I just want to kind of remind everybody that this is not a default aircraft with the base model of the game. You're going to have to get the fancier version in order to kind of get this. A bunch of big differences between this and the CJ, but we'll kind of deal with those one by one. In case you're curious as far as where we are and where we're going today, we're going to basically be taking off from, this is London Heathrow Airport, and we're going to be flying a pretty good chunk of distance and landing in Brussels over there in Belgium. So it's a pretty solid flight, about 254 miles. We'll skip a little bit of it, just kind of show you off the different features of the plane, as well as give everybody an opportunity to see some of the different systems. Okay, let's go ahead and pop in and see what's different. So first things first, this is an expensive airplane. Now, there's a lot of airplanes in Flight Simulator, and a lot of them are very expensive, but this is just like the cake, and that takes the cake 5 more times. Like, everything's leather, everything's carbon fiber. You've got dual lithium-ion batteries in this thing. You have more soundproofing than you've ever experienced in your life as far as what you can possibly cram into one business jet. It also has this amazing little feature above our head, which unfortunately we didn't opt for the $600,000 upgrade, which would be a heads-up display on a business jet. That's just amazing. Okay, enough about talking about this thing. Let's go ahead and get this thing rolling. So first things first, this aircraft is simplified. There's not really a lot of crazy things. The real plane, from what I was able to read, has got a couple different quirks on it that we're not really going to get to see today, so I'm not worrying about it too much. First things first, if you come down here, you've got all sorts of fun little options as far as power selections goes. Swinging over here on the right, you have the other set of power selections as well. These 2 buttons are going to be very important for us in a minute. Notice we have our Apu switch over here. This is one of those little honey wheel jobbies. Also notice, incredibly, we actually have an automatic throttle on this aircraft. So even though we're a teeny tiny little business jet, we still have all the conveniences of a much bigger jet. So let's go ahead and get this thing rolling. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and flip on my 2 batteries. First thing which you do need to know, which is kind of important here, is we can run off of external power if we choose to do so. We're not going to be running off external power today on account of the fact we just don't need to. We have our own APU that we can use in order to make that kind of be facilitated for us. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come swing down here, which is our APU switch, click it to the on position, and then you're going to simply click it over to the start position. You don't have to click and hold the crank on it for too long. It's just going to take a few moments to go ahead and spool up the APU itself. If you take a look down here in the bottom left corner, you've got a little indication of the current APU status. Again, generally this APU takes, you have to get it until it gets to about 100% or so before it's actually going to be doing anything useful for you. While that's going on, we might as well start getting everything else all set up for us. So first things first, I'm going to go ahead and again, this is the big screen here. This is the actual control panel down here. I'm going to go ahead and scroll down here. You've got all sorts of different options for map settings. You can turn on weather display. You can do all the usual things that you can kind of do. We've got our procedures. You've got your speed bugs. Like if I wanted to come in here and I wanted to set my rotate speed, I'll go ahead and click it there. And of course, my approach speed is going to be important later on, but I'm not going to be setting that too. Too bad there's no option for a V2 because that'd be pretty awesome right now, but I will set my VY speed as well. So now that that's been set, I can just pop the home button and come right on back here without too much concern with any of that. Again, while my APU is rolling, it's all gotten up to speed. I'll go ahead and flip on my Apu Generator now. So now we're running off of our own power supply inside this aircraft. Swinging over on this side of things, I'm going to go ahead and start setting up all my altitudes. We're going to be traveling at 45,000 feet today, which is probably the highest I think I've been in Flight Simulator so far. So I'm going to go ahead and crank this all the way up to 45,000. Wow. Keep in mind, whatever your particular procedure is, it's going to dictate exactly what you're able to do. By the way, somebody was asking to go ahead and take a detailed look at my flight plans for those of you who'd like to go ahead and do it. And you can see that it is, of course, deleted all the stuff that I put into it. There it is. And now we can actually see our flight plan itself. Again, we're leaving Heathrow, and we're going to be going all the way down here for an Ils Approach into, like I said, EHAM, basically. Again, since you got to give that a minute to do. I didn't use any external software for this. I just used the built-in software to do that as well. Okay, we're getting a nice little pushback here, which is kind of annoying because I really just need to take a left turn to get to where we need to go. And that's what you get for letting your co-pilot decide where the plane should go. I'm just going to order him to stop, and I'm going to go ahead and slap the parking brake while I finish everything up. Keep in mind, if we're on external power, we would have had issues. Okay, let's go ahead and set up our speed. Keep in mind in this aircraft, we do have the ability to go ahead, and I'm going to press flick first. We do have the ability to dial in some pretty good stuff as far as speed goes. Again, you have automatic throttle on here, something that you usually don't get in aircraft this small. Set that. Normally, we want to go ahead and set our runway heading. I'll do that when we get a little closer to takeoff in just a minute. Okay, with that all set up and everything's looking pretty solid as far as that stuff goes, I'm just kind of walking through myself all my electronics. Probably a good idea to go ahead and flip on some lights to let everybody know that we're going to get going in just a minute. Anti-collision, or your bacon lights, over on this particular side. Of course, you got your passenger safety lights and all that other good stuff, as well as your taxi light, which I'm going to go ahead and flip on right now as well. Now we're pretty much ready to get this thing started. I can see that we have everything already preset. We've got all of our information up here, all set the exact way that we want it to do. Coming down here, looking here, everything's basically the exact way. We have our electrical stuff set up. Notice our bus tie is set to closed at this time. At any point, of course, you can slap it open. Again, the bus tie is just going to link the left side of the aircraft with the right side of the aircraft electronically, so it has the ability to basically talk to itself. Coming down here, this is how we get this thing started. It's actually really, really simple, which I think is wonderful. You have these two little switches that are basically your run switches. This is going to provide fuel to the engines. You flip those onto run. Keep in mind at this time, I have set up to make sure the APU is running so we can get that power that we're going to need to go ahead and get this thing started. Get this thing rolling is pretty simple. We just come over here and we click on the button that we want, and then we'll start the starting process of that particular engine. You can see that it's starting to spool up right away. There's no special grabbing handles. There's no anything crazy like that in the slightest. It just kind of goes on its own, which I think is absolutely great. Kind of letting this thing kind of warm up here. It's going to take just a few moments to get this thing started. We have all our radio access down here for anybody who's interested in doing any of those options. All right, we can adjust the map if we needed to from that. Looking pretty good. Again, these are not touchscreens. All your displays are going to be controlled from down here, which is just a little bit different. Wait for that engine to spin up. It's coming. There we are. Just about started on that side. Ice protection, of course. Don't forget to put in your pitot-static heat. All right, looking good for that engine. Now we're going to go ahead and start the next one. Just press and hold for just a moment. Let go. And it'll start warming up that left engine as well. While this is going on, of course, now that we have some hydraulic pressure inside this aircraft, we'll go ahead and set our takeoff flaps. We're just going to do a single notch here. You can do two if you need, but I find one notch is going to be more than enough for most of what I'm always using it for. Checking everything real quickly.
Ground red 64 with India ready to taxi IFR.
Red 64 taxi to and hold short of runway 27 right using taxiway Mike Lima 23 Alpha 1.
Lucky us. It's literally the runway directly next to us.
70 flight 1 ready.
Check and make sure everything else is looking good. Again, if you need to shut this engine off, you just come to the run button and click it once, and the engines will instantly start spooling themselves back down.
23 Alpha 1 red 64.
All right, we're good to go. Let's go ahead and bring ourselves over to the runway and get this party started. Taxiing this aircraft is relatively simple. Just make sure you disengage your parking brake. This aircraft has a lot of thrust, so really got to go easy with it. As usual, we have to select somebody to get mowed down. He's looking like a pretty good victim real quickly. Excuse me, sir. You happen to be in my way. Just kidding. Now, when you just tap the gas on this thing, you're going to get ripping along at very high speeds. I'm just going to get myself all nice and set up here. We're going to line ourselves up with the runway. Again, we have automatic throttle on this, which is wonderful because then we don't have to babysit it nearly as much. You can see there's our takeoff runway. Our flaps are already in the correct positions. And we're just going to kind of do this quick little left-right action and get ourselves nice and lined up for the runway. Looking good so far. Oh, we don't have map pointer control. Actually, you could use your finger to actually touch where on the map you wanted to navigate. It's kind of cool. All right, get ourselves nice and lined up.
Position caution, other traffic.
Whoop.
Red 64 continue taxi.
Interesting. I don't know what that other traffic was, but we'll get rolling anyway. Man, this is just so much airplane. Now, what you don't see, and again, we're in 2D here, so that's going to affect us a little bit, is just how far up to the actual cockpit you are. Like, this little piece of hood here is basically in your face. You can't really see that when we're only in 2D, though. All right, we've located ourselves on the main runway, and we're now ready to roll. Go ahead and tap the parking brakes, and let's request permission to take off. All right, now we're ready to go. We've been given permission to rock. One important thing we want to do, though, is we want to come down here. We want to make sure our navigation source is set to FMS so that we can go ahead and use this aircraft's FMS in order to guide us on our flight here. Take a look out. Our approach looks pretty clear, so I'm going to go ahead and slap on the landing lights. I love buttons for landing lights. It's just so convenient. And we're just going to go ahead and taxi ourselves directly onto the runway. Going up a little tiny bit of a hill here, which is perfectly fine. And you can see our runway is right here on the left. Man, does this thing like to accelerate quickly. Line ourselves up for 27 right. Check the approach. They already gave us permission, and we are ready to rock. Taking this aircraft off is a relatively simple process. So we can either do the toga button, which in case the automatic throttle is going to do all the hard work for us. Or as I like to do, I like to go ahead and fly this one by hand because it's just more satisfying. And line this thing up with the runway. Again, there's nobody behind us, so I'm not too worried about stealing this particular spot. One thing that I do like to do on all flights, of course, is I like to go ahead and start my timer. Go ahead and start it, and let's go ahead and do it to it. Go ahead and slap that throttle in the up forward position. All right, and off we go. Notice you don't need full throttle in order to throw yourself way into the red here, so you want to kind of keep an eye on that. If you're using automatic takeoff, of course, you're going to find that throttle is going to basically go wham on you, and it's going to give you all sorts of nasty indications. So just kind of be mindful of that. All right, the nice thing is we did set our rotation speed bug, which you can see is right there. That's going to be about 120 knots. Go ahead and tug the nose up just a teeny tiny bit. We got a little bit of a crosswind. We are flying with real world weather today. As soon as we get airborne, we want to go ahead and flap up the landing gear there. Make sure they're in the up position. And we're going to go ahead and bring up our first natural flaps once we get over 175 knots. Very nice. Ooh, getting a little bit of chop there. But we're right next to London, so it doesn't surprise me too much. And we are now on our way. All right, our best climb speed in this aircraft is right around 185 knots. But of course, if you want to travel at 185 knots, this nose is going to be pointing out like 26, 27 degrees, which is not going to be very pleasant for executive transport sort of people in the back seat. So we always want to be mindful of that. Go ahead and turn on the automatic pilot at this time. Keep in mind, the moment I do that, of course, this aircraft is going to start freaking out a little bit, but that's okay. Automatic pilot on, navigation mode on. Okay. So now the nice thing is the automatic pilot is now going to take control of the roll program. You can see I've got FMS selected right here. The pit means that we're just on pitch mode at current. Simply all that means is that the aircraft's nose angle that we set it just a moment ago is what it's going to be holding on to. Now, if I wanted to switch real quickly to flick mode, which is going to be flight level change, you'll notice it'll take me to 215 knots because that's what we set. So now the aircraft is going to auto pitch itself in order to maintain 215 knots. But since we're in a hurry here, I'm going to go ahead and dial this up a little bit higher. Ooh. Seems to be being a little rude to me today, but that's okay. We are in managed speed mode. There we go. Sorry about that. The key thing that I missed here is you got to make sure that switch is set to man, otherwise the FS is going to try to hijack you. All right, we need about 240 knots. Usually gets us going up pretty good. Getting a little tiny bit of turbulence, but again, doesn't surprise me too much. All right, now we are on our way once again. Goodbye, Heathrow. We'll miss you. You have one of the most complicated approach procedures I've ever seen on paper before. And you can see we are ripping across the English countryside. Again, this is using real time of day as well as real weather. So I'm kind of hoping we get some of the sights kind of on our way up here. And we'll modify things just a teeny tiny bit once we do get up to altitude in a moment. So as usual, given the fact that we're kind of like an airliner, we want to go ahead and make sure our landing lights are off when we cross the 10,000 foot point. But basically after that, it's going to be a pretty smooth sailing flight all the way up to our cruise altitude. One of the things you want to keep an eye on in this aircraft is as the aircraft does get higher, your engines are going to have less air to be grabbing onto, and your temperatures are going to drop, meaning you're going to have to smoothly adjust your throttle pretty much the entire ride up, which is a little different from some of the other aircraft. Again, keep in mind if you activated the auto throttle, which you could certainly do at any time, it's going to take that from you, and it's going to want to do things with it. I'm going to keep this on manual for now. We're going to be looking at the auto throttle when we do our approach into Brussels. All right, now I'm going to carry us up to, like I said, about 10,000 feet. Look at the front window here so I can see what's going on. Hey there. It's such a cool... Oh, this is great. Much nicer once you get in the air. I'll give you that much. Crossing 10,000. Just a moment. Just kind of keeping an eye on that real quickly. Alright, go ahead and flip it over to FMS mode if you want. But keep in mind, we didn't program the FMS with any particular speed, so it's not going to do that. But what we will do is we'll look above our heads, go ahead and click out our lights that we don't need. Probably not be a bad idea. Oh, it's on, okay. I just wanted to make sure that was working. We can go ahead and throw on our recognition lights, which is just going to let everybody around them know where we are. Now, it's a good idea, of course, to go ahead and change your speed. I'm going to go ahead and flip this on. We're going to get up to about 270. It's going to be a slightly faster climb for us. It's also going to be, we could obviously keep that nose up at like 240, like I said, but if we do something like that, it's going to give us a little bit slower of a total trip time. So I am going to use a relatively high speed here. Again, as long as you keep it inside of the green, nothing bad can happen with the aircraft. Oh, one thing I did forget, and I'm surprised you guys weren't yelling in my ear, is I forgot to shut the APU off, which is extremely naughty, because in the real world, that thing sucks down quite a bit of fuel. So you want to kind of keep that in the back of your head as well. All right, just checking to make sure everything makes sense. Our timer is going. Looks good to me. Go back to the home page. Confirming, we can go ahead and turn some bearings on. Speed bugs. I'm going to disable that one for VR. We don't want that anymore, but we do want our approach speed, which is 149 knots. We're going to be taking advantage of that, like I said, when we come in for a landing in just a little bit. PFD, what you can do is you can turn AOA on or off. You can see we're pretty much right at the sweet spot. You can turn the wind on. I'm an option 3 fan, as everybody knows. And of course, you can change your channel spacing for those of you who are using manual radios on this given aircraft. By the way, if you wanted to do manual radios, if you come over on this side, all you have to do is click on COM2, and that's, my bad, you can go ahead and swap by pressing this button right here. If you want to play with the radios, apologies, you can just come over here and dial in the individual radio frequencies themselves. You know, if I wanted to go to 121.50, I could set that, I could either transport or I could arm it, in which case it's now in standby. I click right there and it'll go ahead and switch over to the other position, so now that I would be on that particular radio frequency. Anytime you get lost, you can just mash the home button and you're good to go. Another thing we'll do, we'll run our way up. I'll go ahead and flip the weather display on. You can see that I've got a little bit of a big old orange spot right there on my left. And of course, we can control the zoom by holding our mouse right here and going in and out. Oh my. I guess I missed the London fog today, so that's going to be working out pretty well. Okay, we'll see you at the top of the climb. All right, we've just crossed about 29,000 feet here, and now is a really good time to go ahead and switch over to Mach mode. I'm going to click right there, and I'm just going to dial in the Mach speed we want to be climbing at this time. Usually a pretty safe Mach to climb at is between 0.75 and 0.78. You don't really want to be going too much higher than that, because you can see even though I'm at 30,000 feet here, Mach 7.8 is pretty darn fast. It's about 289. Another thing I want to point out also is as I've been climbing, I've had to push the throttle forward very, very gently during the entire climb in order to maintain my maximum performance of this particular aircraft. Notice I started at like 71%. You can see I'm sitting here at 94% right now. And you can also see that my ITT, which was extremely high during takeoff, has actually come down dramatically because the air is so much thinner and this engine is just not quite putting out the power that it had a little bit earlier. All right, we're just cresting almost 40,000 feet, and we've just been given a call from air traffic control asking us to begin our descent. So even though we got up this incredibly high, we're unfortunately going to have to come right back down. So I'm actually going to synchronize altitude, and I'm going to go ahead and start our descent down to Brussels. Like I said, not much of a flight here today, but again, just enough to kind of get everything going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a flight level change descent. I'm just going to press FLC. I'm going to go ahead and pull back the throttles, make sure we're on knots, and I'm going to go ahead and set it at 240. And now we just let the aircraft kind of drift down on its own without having to worry too much about anything at this point. We can control our descent rate very, very quickly and easily by, of course, adjusting our power. But we need to start thinking about our actual approach. So, of course, I'm starting to get everything nice and ready here. I'm consulting everything that I need to do. I'm going to make sure that my CDI is set correctly once we get a little bit lower. But you can see that if I just cut the throttle on this thing and let's start drifting down, it comes down fast. Oh boy, look at the weather in Europe today. This is going to be a very, very interesting approach because we basically need to punch right through that cloud right here. One thing I was mentioning a little bit earlier was about some of the features of this particular system here as far as what we can do with the weather. One thing I did not show, though, is if you actually go to the weather selection page, you can change between NextRad, which is going to give you the ability to go ahead and kind of see what's out there by satellite, but you can also switch to weather radar mode. You both have basically horizontal mode, which is what this is. And you also have vertical mode, which is what this is. I'm actually going to leave this going because I think it's absolutely awesome. We also have a little inset page right here, so I'm not too concerned right now about not being able to see something that's going to be coming up in a minute. Now that it's been all kind of preset and we're in pretty darn good shape here, I'm just going to go ahead and meet you guys when we get a little bit closer to our approach. While we're descending, I want to show you a pretty cool slick trick as well as get us ready for our actual approach that we're going to need in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down to my little control panel here, and I'm actually going to push down on this knob right here, which brings up this weird little grid. What this grid is it actually allows you to click and drag with your mouse so you can move the map around. So in this case, I'm clicking and dragging over here so I can actually study our approach. We're going to go to Sugol, we're going to go to Echo Hotel 606, Nursey, Echo Hotel 607, 608, 621, and then it's going to take us right into a landing real quickly here. Now, this is such a slick feature because it gives you the ability to basically zoom in too. So if I actually were to come over here and go like this with my mouse wheel, I can actually zoom all the way down and study my approach very, very quickly and very, very easily, as well as the terrain involved with a given approach, which makes it a little bit simpler in order to kind of see. Now, if you get yourself all sorts of out of whack here and you can't figure out where you are, you can just press the home button and snap right back to where you were. Well, we're right about to cross into Belgium in just a few moments. I'm going to kind of show you real quickly how the automatic throttle on this aircraft works. Now, first things first, the auto throttle on this button is not up here for once. It's actually right here on the back side of the throttle. I actually recommend if you have a really, really good joystick, take the minute to go ahead and program that button directly. So to turn on the automatic throttle, I just click it once. Now, as soon as you push that button, this throttle is now under control of the computer on board the actual aircraft itself. Now, you'll notice that whatever I have set for my speed here is what this throttle is going to try to match. So if I come in here and I say, oh, I really wanted 255, you'll notice the throttle automatically comes forward on its own, spins up a little bit more speed, and immediately starts slowing down instantaneously. I just want to confirm that command. I'll come down to 9,000 feet. So I'm going to order up 9,000 feet real quickly, but this time I'm not going to do a flight level change. The reason I don't want to do a flight level change is because the auto throttle will then fight me. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to press VS. I'm going to set this to 2,000 feet. What's going to happen now is the throttle is going to pull itself back automatically because, again, we don't need that extra thrust, and it's going to start descending at exactly 2,000 feet per minute. This is a really, really solid way in order to kind of control your descent in a slightly different manner. Now, when you do things like really, really sophisticated step descents into a specific area, you can actually calculate the exact vertical speed you need and literally just leave your automatic throttle to keep your aircraft moving at the same speed for the entire trip. It's a very, very powerful ability. One thing I do want to warn you, though, is notice I've got this thing set. Basically, it's still moving, but we're still quite a bit over the speed that we intended. Our vertical speed is just a bit too high to be safe here. So we're going to continue our little descent here. I'm just going to go ahead one more time, go ahead and confirm that everything makes sense the way I expected it to. Again, we want to be very careful. It's a pretty straightforward approach, and again, we're going to have to make sure we flip that CDI over to get everything ready when we get a little bit closer. All right, here we are, ready for landing. And unfortunately, Microsoft Flight Simulator decided to make things a little more interesting than they needed to be for me, and went ahead and upped me way too much altitude for what we needed to do here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to execute myself a handy-dandy big old rotation here in the sky, and then come back around and do a traditional ILS approach to the actual airport itself. So as usual, you definitely want to be very, very cautious with the avionics and everything else, but it's a little weird when air traffic control asks you to go from 10,000 feet to 1,000 feet in such a hurry. Usually doesn't end up so well in the real world as well as it does in our situation here too. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and bring ourselves nice and round. Like I said, got to get ourselves a little bit more altitude to kind of make ourselves a little bit more safe. This has basically become a modified teardrop procedure as we kind of come spinning around here and kind of bring ourselves back in for a landing. I've got everything under manual control for now, and again, sometimes this comes up, sometimes it doesn't. You just want to kind of be very mindful of it when it does. All right, we'll go ahead and reline ourselves up, and I'll see you in a sec. All right, we're cruising around on final approach. A couple things that I've set up already. I've made sure that our approach autopilot is on. I've made sure that our CDI has been selected to localizer. Doing that is simply a matter of making sure that the bearing source is set correctly. Of course, if we wanted to confirm that we are on the correct navigational frequency, at any point, of course, we can come down here, click that, and double check to make sure the ILS frequency will be selected matches the ILS frequency that we actually want. Make sure your automatic throttle is not fighting you at any particular point, but of course, if you want to, you can use the automatic throttle to hold our approach speed. As you probably recall, our approach speed from earlier was about 149 knots. So I'm going to go ahead and slide in 149 real quickly. 149 knots is about right there. Make sure your flaps are in the correct position. Make sure your landing gear is in the correct position. Make sure your landing lights are in the correct position, and everything else is ready to rock. Now that we've gone ahead and gotten everything nice and set up here, I'm going to go ahead and re-engage the automatic throttle. And because we've already selected our speed of 149 knots, and because approach mode has already been selected, this aircraft will actually approach the ground completely unaided to our runway in just a moment. Just going to confirm a couple of things real quickly. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Speed's up a little high, but it's not unusual that the auto throttle will actually give you slightly higher speed than you anticipated. That seems to just be something built within the program itself. There's our handy-dandy runway. As you can see, it's getting a little late at night. If we wanted to go ahead and flip on some landing lights, or I should say not landing lights, if we wanted to make things a little bit easier to see, we go ahead and crank that light real quick. All right, coming in pretty quick. Don't forget to disengage the automatic throttle when you are landing this aircraft. Otherwise, it will accelerate during the flare. So you want to be very cautious with that. One trick I actually found that works really well is you can see whatever throttle sets itself to, and then, of course, you can disable the auto throttle like I just did, and then manually set it. Let's visually confirm that everything is in the correct position. Got my flaps all the way down at this time now. Don't forget to engage a little bit more thrust when you do that. Confirming that everything on this side looks the way that I expected to. We did have to turn on anti-icing during our descent here. I'm actually going to disable that because we started getting all sorts of nasty frost on the windshield itself, which doesn't surprise me. That happens sometimes. Keep in mind when you do engage that last notch of flaps, this aircraft is going to get very, very slow, very, very quickly. So be very cautious with that. One more check over everything. Looks pretty good. Looks pretty good. Looks like we are slightly off to the right, even though it claims that we're correct. Just a minute, I'm going to go ahead and override the automatic pilot. I'm going to take the landing down myself because I trust myself a little bit better than sometimes. Again, if we have the auto throttle on, I can't say this again, you have to absolutely make sure you disable it before you put down, because then you're going to run into the boo-boo where basically you go ahead and crash yourself because the engine starts accelerating as you're trying to slow down. All right, I've disabled automatic throttle. I'm just doing this by hand at this particular point. Speed is absolutely perfect. Landing this aircraft is a little weird for those of you who come from larger airliners. The biggest shock that you're going to get is the fact that when you do go to flare, this thing loves to float. So you actually got to cut your throttle a little bit sooner than you're used to, especially if you're coming from like an Airbus A320. We have a bit of crosswind today. It's about 9 knots, which is more than enough, as you can see, to knock us right off the end of the runway. But it's not going to be enough to do any real damage to this aircraft. All right, I'm going to go ahead and give myself a little bit of crab angle here. That looks pretty good. We're a little high, even though the indicator on the left side says that we're a little bit like that. Remember, we're very, very low in this plane compared to the bigger airliners. We see our touchdown point looking pretty solid. As soon as we cross the end of the runway, you're going to want to gently pull the throttle all the way back to 0. Hold it steady. Again, you want to get a little bit closer to the ground than you usually think of. Lift the nose up a little bit. You don't need to lift the nose up a lot for this aircraft. And we are down. As soon as you're down, I'm going to go ahead and press the reverse key, which is going to be on your keyboard somewhere, and you're going to slap this thing into reverse. It's going to make an awful lot of noise. And once you drop under 80 knots, you're going to want to pull the throttle back and disengage your thrust reversers. And that's basically all there is to operating this aircraft. Just a quick review. When you're approaching, your approach speed you can get automatically out of the computer by clicking your references page. Again, you can do that on either one of these radios. Keep in mind, for those of you who are using this aircraft for, like commercial kind of stuff, you want to make sure that whatever flight plan you put in, you take the time to kind of set it up before you get in the aircraft. If you did need to manually set up a flight plan, you could always come in here like this onto the home page. We'll go ahead and stop the aircraft before we go off the runway here. You can still go to the home page. You can actually go to the flight plan button and individually dial in each and every one of your waypoints. You can even click them, activate them, disable them, remove them, insert them after. There's a whole video tutorial I have on this explaining how this aircraft works. Other than that, we have a pretty successful flight. Air traffic control asked me nicely to get a little bit lower, a little bit sooner. But then again, we're the pilots. We're the ones responsible for making sure the plane gets down on the ground. Enjoy.